At about 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, Lisa walked through the front door, casually tossing her purse and keys onto the nightstand. She strolled down the hallway toward the master bedroom, completely ignoring me as I sat in the office. Whether she noticed me or not didn't matter. After years of indifference, I'd become practically invisible to her. Once she was out of sight, I followed her, retrieved her keys, and swapped them for my spare set. Then, digging through her purse, I grabbed her cell phone and wallet. I emptied the wallet, pocketing the cash and credit cards, and even took her driver's license for good measure. With my makeshift precautions in place, I returned to my spot in the office. About 15 minutes later, Lisa emerged from the hallway, freshly dressed and looking poised. As she slung her purse over her shoulder and grabbed her keys, she noticed me and announced, "I'm meeting some girls from work." "Don't wait up." "No, you're not going out with your work friends," I said firmly. She rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. "Ethan, you should know by now you don't control me." "I'll do what I please," she snapped. "I'm not saying you can't hang out with friends. I'm saying you're lying. You're not meeting coworkers. You're going to see your boyfriend." "Don't insult my intelligence," I countered. Lisa froze for a moment, then strode boldly into the office to confront me directly. "All right, Ethan," she began, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'd prefer to handle this differently, but let's end the charade here. You have two options. Either salvage what's left of this marriage by giving me some freedom, or accept that we're getting divorced. What's it going to be?" Without missing a beat, I smirked. "I'll take door number 3. Lisa scoffed, folding her arms. "Don't be ridiculous. There is no door number 3. Either you deal with the fact that I have a lover now, a real man, or you can brace yourself for the consequences," she warned. I stood up, anger bubbling to the surface, and walked right up to her. Pushing her against the wall, I ripped the engagement and wedding rings from her hand. My voice dropped to a menacing whisper as I glared into her eyes. "Here's your door number 3. It's my front door. When you walk out of it, don't expect to come back. Not with a single thing. You'll leave behind your husband, your daughter, your house, your money, your car, and eventually even your job. You're done." Lisa's confidence faltered, her voice trembling. "You're delusional, Ethan. My lawyer will destroy you. If you try to ruin me, you'll regret it," she muttered nervously. Ignoring her threats, I yanked her away from the wall and dragged her to the front door. Her heels scraped against the floor as she stumbled, screaming incoherently, her composure shattered. In all our years of marriage, I had never laid a hand on her, and she was clearly unprepared for my fury. Once we reached the front yard, I shoved her out the door and slammed it shut behind her, locking it tight. Earlier that day, I had already replaced the lock, ensuring she wouldn't have access again. With Lisa gone, I made the first of 2 critical calls. Dialing my 19-year-old daughter Emily at college, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Hey, sweetheart, it's Dad. Things with your mom have reached a breaking point. Looks like she's moving in with her boyfriend. I need to talk to you about it, because she's probably going to spin the story to make herself look like the victim." I paused, then continued. "Just so you know, I've recorded a lot of our past arguments, including the last conversation we had. You can listen if you want to understand the truth. The reality is, your mom's been cheating. Not sure for how long, and she's chosen him over us. I'll explain more when we talk, but you need to be cautious if you interact with her. This guy she's seeing gives me a bad feeling." I then asked Emily to come home for the weekend, hoping to discuss things face-to-face and let her decide if she wanted to hear the recordings. Thankfully, she agreed to visit on Friday. With that sorted, I made my second call to Linda, our neighbor down the street. "Hi, Linda, it's Ethan," I said, keeping my tone measured. "If your offer's still on the table, I'd like to take you up on it. Could you come over in about an hour?" I kept the details short, but Linda was someone I trusted to confide in. Lisa and I had married young, and things seemed fine at first. We had Emily soon after, and life felt good for a while. But over time, Lisa's personality shifted dramatically. She became irritable, manipulative, and controlling. No matter how hard I tried to keep her happy or maintain peace, it was never enough. Now, with everything unraveling, I realized how far things had spiraled out of control. Looking back, I realized I had been complicit in my own misery by constantly bending over backward to please Lisa. Now, in our 40s, our lives were an utter disaster. It wasn't long before I uncovered her affair with a man named Derek, a hot-headed individual with a history of violence. Strangely enough, realizing that our marriage was irreparable felt like a weight had been lifted. With that clarity, I began planning my next steps. I've heard stories of husbands taking half the money when their marriages fall apart, I reflected. But not me. I took every single cent I could get my hands on. That included all the cash in the house. I changed the locks and began orchestrating ways to push Lisa to her breaking point. I knew her patterns well enough to predict her moves. She was dangerous, sure, but I intended to ensure her worst impulses would be turned inward this time. In fact, my preparations had started long before I found out about Derek. Over the years, I had secretly recorded many of our arguments. Lisa had no idea that the MP3 player I always carried was actually a recording device. I had been quietly building a library of her explosive outbursts. I knew that, to the outside world, Lisa was charming and composed. No one would ever believe the things she said and did behind closed doors unless I had evidence. These recordings would serve as my truth, even for Emily, to show her who Lisa really was. The Monday after our explosive Sunday argument, I decided to host an unconventional celebration at work. In the break room, a large banner read "Happy Divorce," complete with cake and ice cream. My coworkers and I were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the process server. To my amusement, the task was handled by a cheerful young woman who arrived wearing a festive hat. Pictures were taken as I gleefully received the divorce papers. In one photo, I kissed her cheek as she handed me the documents. In another, we were laughing as I fed her a slice of cake. Later that day, I emailed the pictures to Lisa, including a few additional snapshots for dramatic effect. Among them were images of Linda, my new roommate, lounging in bed with me, the sheets pulled up just enough to leave the rest to Lisa's imagination. One key detail I hoped she noticed. Her wedding rings were now on Linda's left hand, resting against my chest. An hour later, Lisa called me in a rage. "You're a disgrace, Ethan. My lawyer is going to annihilate you after seeing those photos." "What a stupid move," she screamed. "Hardly, Lisa," I replied coolly. "There's nothing inappropriate in those pictures. No nudity, no scandal. Just a bit of fun between neighbors." "Nice try. We'll settle this later," she fumed. "I'll be at the house tonight to pick up some of my belongings. It's best if you're not there. If I'm not home, you're not getting in. The locks have been changed. If you need anything, you'd better come before 6:45. Linda and I have plans at 7 o'clock, and I'm not about to be late," I said, hanging up before she could respond. Later that evening, Lisa showed up, pounding on the door and yelling. By the time I returned home from Linda's house, I found the front window shattered, with blood smeared across the shards. Reviewing the security footage, I saw Lisa smashing the window with a tire iron and cutting her forearm in the process. Her threats to harm me were loud and clear on the recording. I contacted the police immediately. An officer helped me file a restraining order, which was served to Lisa the next morning. The terms barred her from coming within 500 feet of me or the house. Lisa's fury reached a new peak, her calls escalating with threats and insults. During one of her calmer moments, she mentioned that her friend Tracy would be stopping by to retrieve some of her belongings. The request raised my suspicions, but I agreed to meet Tracy at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. Before she arrived, I set up a hidden video camera in the bedroom with a monitor in my office to keep an eye on things. When Tracy showed up, I greeted her warmly as she began packing Lisa's clothes into 2 large trash bags. At one point, she nervously asked for a glass of water. While I fetched the water, the monitor revealed her pulling a shoebox from the closet and adding it to one of the bags. When I returned, she was all smiles, pretending nothing had happened. "That should be everything," Tracy said, hoisting one of the bags. Noticing its weight, I offered to help, but she declined, clutching the bag tightly. "Tracy," I said, blocking her path, "is there something in that bag I should know about?" She froze, stammering something about it just being clothes. but the odor coming from the bag gave her away. I opened it to find stacks of $50 and $100 bills. "So, this is what you came here for," I said. Tracy panicked, insisting the money belonged to Lisa and that she was only trying to help. "You were sent here for clothes, but are leaving with a box of cash. That's theft, Tracy. I should call the police right now," I warned. She broke down, pleading for leniency, citing her children and husband. I made my terms clear. She would report back to me on everything Lisa said or did, particularly about Derek or the divorce. If she crossed me or revealed our arrangement, I would hand the video of her attempted theft to the authorities. Reluctantly, Tracy agreed. As soon as she left, I took the box of cash to Linda's house for safekeeping. I suspected the money came from Aunt Clara, Lisa's late aunt. When Aunt Clara passed a few months ago, Lisa inherited her rural cottage, but there had been no mention of cash. It seemed Lisa had discovered a hidden stash during one of her visits. When Lisa called, her voice was a mix of fury and desperation. "That money is mine, Ethan. Give it back," she shouted. "You stole money from my nightstand. That money is mine." Lisa snapped, her voice brimming with anger. "You mean the money in the shoebox? If Tracy found it, she likely kept it. I don't have it. And if you're hiding untaxed income, the IRS might like to know," I retorted coolly. She hung up, clearly furious. Anticipating retaliation, I installed an exterior camera on my car. On Wednesday morning, my foresight paid off. I watched live footage of Lisa smashing my car windows and windshield with a hammer. I immediately called the police, and they arrested her, adding resisting arrest to her charges. Later that day, her lawyer informed me of a Thursday hearing about joint account funds. At court, Lisa's lawyer accused me of unfairly draining our accounts. I countered with bank statements showing Lisa had been funneling her income into a personal account for months. The judge sided with me, stating financial arrangements would remain unchanged until the divorce decree. As I left, Lisa confronted me, hurling threats. "You're violating the restraining order, Lisa," I said calmly, recording her. "Jail was rough. Ready for more." She fumed, but I walked away, leaving her fuming in the hallway. That evening, I went to a bar, needing a break from the chaos. At the bar, I ran into an intriguing man named Nathan. Luckily, he was still there when I arrived. I approached him with a smile and asked if he remembered me. His response was curt but playful. "Your name isn't important." Nathan then mentioned that he was still driving the same beat-up car. He expressed frustration over it, explaining that his wife had taken the better car when she ran off with her new lover. "The air conditioning's busted, and I can't even afford to fix it," he grumbled. I leaned in slightly and asked, "Do you have car insurance?" When he nodded, I added, "Well, if you're open to some creative thinking, I might have a way to help you upgrade to something with working AC." Nathan's eyebrows lifted, and he leaned in too. "I'm listening," he said cautiously. "Let's imagine this. You're driving down 38th Street, and suddenly a gray cat runs across the road. Naturally, you slam on the brakes. The car behind you, say a certain lady, might rear-end your car. If she hits you at over 15 miles per hour, your old clunker could be totaled. Insurance would cover the damages, and you could use the payout to get a better ride. Just make sure your seatbelt's on and your head's firmly against the headrest. You'll be fine." He hesitated. "But what if the woman who hits me gets hurt? I don't want to mess someone up like that." "She won't. Trust me, she'll be fine. Besides, she's an unfaithful wife, so you won't feel too guilty. And no one else will be in her car. Follow my instructions, and it'll work out. What do you think?" Nathan mulled it over before his lips curled into a grin. "Man, that sounds great. I hate cheaters, and I'd love to be rid of this piece of junk." "Perfect. Tomorrow, park at the corner of 38th and Ling by 5 p.m. Look for a blue Miata leaving the lot. When you see it, pull out in front of her. She hates passing other cars, so keep driving until she's right behind you. Eventually, you'll spot the gray cat. Brake hard. Afterward, stay in your car and call emergency services. Mention a possible neck injury for good measure." Nathan nodded along, but I added a final warning. "Oh, and we've never met. I'm not coming back to this bar, and as far as anyone knows, this conversation never happened." He smirked. "Got it. I'm colder than the AC in my future car. On Friday, I left work early to meet Emily at home, as planned. She had finished her classes for the week and returned Sunday evening. We sat down to discuss the divorce, and I played a recording of the conversation I'd had with Lisa about door number 3. Emily was stunned by her mother's ruthless tone and demands. Then I shared recordings I had collected over the past 2 years, revealing a side of Lisa Emily had never seen before. "What do you know about the guy Mom's with, Dad?" she asked hesitantly. "I know he's trouble, Emily," I said firmly, "and I want you to stay away from him. If you meet your mom, make sure it's in a public place. I don't trust what he might do to get back at me. Always carry something for protection, and be cautious if you even think he's nearby." Emily nodded, her face a mix of shock and sadness. "I knew you and Mom had issues, but I didn't realize it was this bad. What went wrong?" I've been expecting this question and gave her a condensed version of my perspective. I explained how Lisa and I had fundamentally different views on marriage. After reflecting for years, I'd identified 4 ways power could be distributed in a relationship. Sometimes, neither person steps up to lead, and everything drifts like a ship without a rudder. I began. Other times, both people try to take charge, which leads to constant battles for control. Then there's the ideal situation, sharing responsibility equally. That's what I thought we'd have, but it didn't turn out that way. I paused before continuing. There's also the dynamic where one partner, usually the man, takes full control. That setup can seem outdated, but under the right circumstances, it can work, especially if the man is deeply devoted to his wife. It's like a fairy tale for women with the right temperament. But if the man is harsh or domineering, it can feel oppressive. I looked at Emily, who was listening intently. "Your grandparents are a good example. Your grandmother was passive, and your grandfather was dominant, sometimes harsh. Your mother grew up seeing that and I think expected me to replicate the dynamic in our marriage. When I tried to share equal footing with Lisa in our relationship, she saw it as weakness. That perception led to a growing lack of respect for me, despite all my efforts to make her happy. Over time, our dynamic shifted into something I dreaded, a relationship where she dominated completely. Your mom decided to take control when she deemed me unworthy of meeting her standards," I explained to Emily. "She became cruel, dictating which projects I should do and insisting they met her high expectations. Time after time, she'd start family projects only to micromanage every detail. Many were left unfinished because I simply couldn't tolerate feeling emasculated in my own home. She'd even tell me how to hold tools while I worked, as though I didn't have a clue." I sighed and added, "When the wife dominates, it goes against human nature. A husband might try to remain loving and affectionate, but the wife loses respect for him as she takes control. In our case, when I began to resist her dominance, Lisa saw me as irresponsible. By that point, she already thought I was weak. And when I refused to let her boss me around, she viewed me as a rebellious child. At this stage, I doubt I'll ever regain her respect. This divorce may be my last shot at earning it back, though I'm not holding my breath." I leaned forward and looked Emily in the eyes. "In the future, when you're making big decisions, whether it's starting a family, choosing a career, or buying a home, make sure mutual respect is at the core of your relationships. You and your partner need to understand what to expect from each other. Without that respect, you might end up in an unhappy situation like your mom and I did." Emily nodded solemnly. "I'll keep that in mind, Dad. I promise." Just then, the phone rang. "Mr. Parker, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife was in a car accident. She's stable and not seriously hurt, but she'll need to stay overnight." Emily and I drove to the hospital. I let her go in first to visit Lisa while I stayed behind. She didn't stay long. When Emily came back, she wore a gloomy expression, and I suspected she had exchanged some harsh words with her mom. I walked into the room and couldn't help myself. "You look terrible, Lisa," I said with a slight grin. "What a week, huh? First, you lose your marriage, husband, and home. Then you get served with a restraining order and arrested for a felony. Next, you miss out on some of the money you expected to take, and now your car's totaled. Here you are in the hospital with a broken wrist and a bruised face, courtesy of the airbag. This divorce is shaping up pretty nicely for me. Freak you. She shot back, her voice filled with venom. Oh, come on, Lisa, I teased. Where's that old charm of yours? Has Derek come to visit yet? Or is he too busy with one of his other two women right now? Her face turned pale. She hadn't known about Derek's infidelity. You probably didn't know about the others when you started all this, did you? I continued. Well, you do now. I wonder how long it'll be before he expects you to play second fiddle. Funny, I never thought of you as someone who'd serve others, but you might want to brush up on those skills. You'll need them in prison. I'm not going to jail, she said through gritted teeth. My lawyer will get these false charges dropped. Oh, really? I leaned in slightly. You smash my car, threaten my safety, and think you'll get off easy? When I spoke to the DA, he made it clear he's gunning for you. He's got all the evidence he needs, and with an election coming up, he wants to look like a hero cracking down on crime. He's pushing for the maximum penalty. Lisa sat in stunned silence. Oh, by the way, I added, did you decide which car insurance company to contact? She looked confused. Car insurance? What are you talking about? We still have the same weight. Realization dawned on her face. Ah, so you didn't bother getting your own insurance this week? I asked, feigning surprise. When you filed for divorce, I removed your car from my policy. You insisted on having your name on the Miata, and only your name. So, if you didn't get coverage, you're in some serious trouble. Fines, towing fees, and 3 years of payments for a car that might end up in a junkyard. Ouch! Lisa's expression darkened as the weight of her predicament sank in. Since you won't have a job after your felony conviction, Lisa, you probably won't need another car, I said with mock sympathy. Oh, and don't forget, you'll likely be on the hook for the guy's medical bills and his insurance company's claim for damages. But at least you have your own medical insurance, right? Lisa's expression faltered. I'm on yours. No, I corrected with a smirk. I removed you from my health insurance on Monday. Didn't you take care of that? Baby, you're in big trouble. The ambulance ride, ER visit, x-rays, doctor's fees, the cast for your arm, the hospital stay, follow-up care. It's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. I leaned in slightly, my tone growing colder. Speaking of being taken care of, remember a couple of years ago when you got sick? I took a week off work to care for you. Held your head while you vomited, cleaned up when you didn't make it to the bathroom, called the doctor, and got your meds. Then, as soon as you were better, you went right back to insulting me and calling me names. Lisa remained silent, her face pale and drawn. I wonder how well Derek will take care of you the next time you're sick, I mused. But enough of that. It's time for me to give him a call. Maybe he's free now that he's done with his other woman. I wish you a good life, Lisa. As I left the room, Lisa sat there crying, but I felt nothing anymore. My sympathy for her had vanished long ago. For a while, life settled into a tense routine. I occasionally checked in with Tracy, who began expressing concerns about Derek's influence over Lisa. Over time, Tracy distanced herself from Lisa entirely, which seemed like a smart decision. One evening, as I returned home and approached my front door, I was attacked on the lawn. I'd been cautious about the possibility of something like this happening, but I didn't see it coming. A man in a ski mask knocked the wind out of me, twisted my arm behind my back, and demanded I give him the box of money and convince the DA to drop the charges against Lisa. I felt helpless, but I still had the car alarm remote in my hand. I pressed the panic button, setting off the alarm. Enraged, the masked man, who I immediately recognized as Derek, struck me again before fleeing as porch lights began flickering on around the neighborhood. Neighbors called the police, and an officer arrived within minutes. Though I wasn't hurt enough to require an ambulance, Derek was long gone. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors could identify him, leaving him free of immediate punishment. The next day, I shared the incident with Emily. To my shock, she confessed something even more disturbing. Dad, I didn't want to tell you, but I also had an encounter with Derek, she began hesitantly. Mom called me to talk, so I agreed, but only if we met somewhere other than his apartment. She asked me to pick her up, but when I arrived, she made me sit on their couch. Then Derek came out. Emily's voice wavered as she recounted the experience. He told me that since Mom wasn't doing well in bed because of her injuries, I'd have to step up and tend to his needs. He said she owed him and that I needed to pay for it. I looked at Mom for help, but she just stared at the floor. Then Derek grabbed my wrist and told me we were going to the bedroom. I had my pepper spray in my purse, so I used it. He screamed, and I grabbed my bag and tried to drag Mom out the door, but she resisted. She wanted to help him in the bathroom instead. I yelled for her to come with me, but she wouldn't. So I left. Emily's face hardened with anger. I can't believe my own mom tried to set me up with that creep. I don't know if I can ever forgive her for this. I felt a surge of fury like I'd never experienced before. My hand instinctively reached for my Beretta in the bedroom, but Emily reassured me that she wasn't hurt. She encouraged me to think about the future instead of succumbing to rage. We agreed on some precautions. Emily promised not to walk alone, to always carry protection, and to avoid meeting her mother unless it was in a safe, public space. She also vowed only to date fellow students for the time being. Gradually, I calmed down, focusing on what mattered, protecting my daughter. Derek made another attempt to intimidate me, urging me to convince the DA to drop the charges. What he didn't anticipate was the conversation I had with the prosecutor. I presented a recording of Emily describing her encounter with Derek, along with evidence of his attack on me. The DA listened intently, then asked if I'd consider leniency toward Lisa or dropping the charges altogether. I paused before responding, carefully weighing my words. Absolutely not, I told the district attorney firmly. I insist on pursuing the maximum penalty. Lisa is under Derek's manipulative control, and separating them is the only way to help her. Prison might be the wake-up call she needs. The DA nodded in agreement, and the case moved forward. At home and work, I felt confident most of the time, but moments of vulnerability lingered. I was especially cautious entering and leaving the garage. Our house was located about 10 miles down a secluded ranch road, with only one turnoff in the next 15 miles. My Beretta was always within reach during the drive, a safeguard I didn't take lightly. One evening, just days before Lisa's trial, I noticed headlights behind me. A pickup truck was tailing me aggressively, its lights glaring in my rearview mirror. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as the truck inched closer, barely 20 feet behind me at 55 miles per hour. I dialed emergency services and activated my phone's voice recorder. As I accelerated to 70 miles per hour, the truck matched my pace, staying on my bumper. The driver is tailgating me and appears to be trying to force me off the road, I told the operator. Please notify the detective handling my assault case. Approaching a bridge spanning a shallow creek, I caught a brief glimpse of Lisa in the passenger seat. The truck accelerated, swerving toward me, clearly attempting to run me off the road. I slammed on the brakes, skidding but maintaining control. The truck stopped ahead, its brake lights glowing ominously, but I had avoided a collision. Quickly, I exited my car with my Beretta, phone, and recorder in hand. I slid down the steep gravel slope beneath the bridge, my heart pounding as I searched for a hiding spot. In the eerie silence, I crouched under the bridge, gripping my weapon tightly. Losing my cell signal added to the tension, but I decided to wait it out. Minutes passed like hours until I heard distant sirens. Emerging cautiously, I climbed back up the embankment, leaving the Beretta behind to avoid alarming the approaching officers. Raising my hands, I signaled to the police not to shoot. The scene unfolded quickly. A pickup truck roared back toward the bridge, only to screech to a halt as officers surrounded it. Lisa and Derek were taken into custody on attempted manslaughter charges. The divorce proceedings that followed were shockingly simple. The judge, sympathetic to my situation, facilitated the process with minimal resistance from Lisa's lawyer. Facing multiple felonies and desperate to reduce her sentence, Lisa relinquished nearly everything in the divorce. During her sentencing hearing, I spoke in her defense, recounting her positive traits before falling under Derek's influence. I expressed a willingness to forgive her for trying to end my life, leaving out her infidelity and years of mistreatment. I couldn't interpret her expression in court. It was a mixture of bitterness and resignation. Derek received a lengthy prison sentence, and I hoped he'd share a cell with a burly inmate who found him particularly appealing. Lisa, on the other hand, received a lighter sentence but would remain incarcerated for at least 3 years before being eligible for parole. Years passed. Lisa was paroled after serving 4 years, but I heard nothing from her. Emily, now married, had no contact with her mother. Then one day, I decided to call Lisa. "This is Ethan. I have something of yours, and I want it back," I said, breaking the silence between us. After a pause, I added, "I want to give you the shoebox. Can we meet?" After a long silence, Lisa replied, "Where and when?" We agreed to meet at my house on Sunday at 2 p.m. When Lisa arrived, neither of us offered a handshake or hug. Her hair was cropped short, and her face looked weathered, far older than her 50 years. She refused the lemonade and cookies I had prepared, her suspicion evident. "If you don't want refreshments," I said, gesturing to the coffee table, "all that's left is the shoebox and whatever else we need to say to each other." "What's the catch, Ethan?" she asked, her voice guarded. "What do you want from me? Is there anything left to take?" "No tricks, Lisa. Everything is there except a few $1,000s. I used that as a down payment for Emily's house when she got married. If you'd like, she can start paying back your share whenever you're ready, but I gave her my portion outright." Lisa's expression shifted. "Emily is married?" she asked, clearly surprised. "Yes," I replied. "For 2 years now. You're already a grandmother. Her daughter's name is Olivia, named after her other grandmother." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and I handed her a tissue. "If you want to reconnect with Emily, I can help facilitate that," I offered gently. Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she seemed genuinely vulnerable. I recounted Emily's life updates, shared that Linda and I had parted ways amicably, and confessed my preference for staying single. "I've found peace on my own," I said, "and I think it's for the best." Lisa listened silently, occasionally nodding. As the conversation wound down, she stood to leave, taking the shoebox. Just before she reached the door, I called out, "Lisa, one last thing. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I've always wondered, did you think I was weak, especially on that last day?" She paused, hand on the doorknob. Turning slightly, she said bitterly, "I hated you. I thought you were cruel and that you ruined my life. But no, I didn't think you were a pushover." With that, she left, disappearing from my life for good.